Some of you are saying, well, I'm going to be the vegetarian dinosaur. The unity of the universe and all the creatures in it is just a magnificent thought to contemplate. And the more details you know, the richer and more magnificent that all is. We're going to stand up and wiggle a minute. And when we come back from the wiggles, I want to give you a philosophical context now for understanding the nature of human beings. And then I want to talk about how we in the Anisa project synthesized all of that and came up with one possible set of characteristics of human beings which we think is justifiable and which we think is almost inevitably necessary for us to take on to if we're going to plan anything significant and new as we head into this next epoch of human development on this planet. Now, would you all like to stand up for just a minute? About man's thinking about the nature of man, human beings thinking about the nature of human beings, and tried to tabulate some of the major insights from both Eastern and Western streams of thought. And I indicated that we had become very happy with Alfred North Whitehead because his own cosmology seemed to pull things from Eastern streams of thought as well as Western streams of thought, particularly those emanating from Plato and Socrates and Aristotle. And in the course of that survey, which is too complex to go into in any detail today, I want to point out one major deviation in that stream of philosophical thought and talk a little bit about that, because that will then paint a philosophical and theoretical context which is compatible with the evolutionary one, which then prepares the ground for looking at how we view humanity from the point of view of the Anisa-Model. In the middle of the 19th century, philosophers, particularly those who were interested in physics, or people or physicists who were also interested in philosophy, came to be uncomfortable with some of the basic ideas which they were adhering to as descriptive of the nature of the universe. I'm talking now basically about the view of the universe as we inherited it from Newton and all of the scientists of his day. Newton, although he was a deeply religious man, in fact all of his manuscripts in physics and so on pay great homage to God and so on. Nonetheless, Newton's view of the universe was completely mechanistic. And there were some views, mechanistic in nature, which were not squaring with empirical evidence. Now, later on in these sessions, I'm going to try to twist George Bonder's arm to talk a little bit about what happens when a whole culture believes something, and when they act on the belief, something goes wrong. Usually what happens is there's a mechanism of denial that enables you to go on believing what you believed even though it's not working. But eventually there will be some honest people. Sometimes they're even nasty, and this is what gets them a problem. They decide not to accept what they're not getting. They're going to refuse to put the blinders on. They're going to refuse to pretend that it's working when it isn't. They discover anomalies, unworkabilities in the scheme. And they propose an alternative scheme. These schemes are called paradigms. And if the new paradigm or the new scheme can account for everything that the old scheme accounts for, plus explain the anomalies, then eventually people will shift from the old to the new. And in essence, what we're trying to do in education is to create a new paradigm where the fundamental premises are changed and everything derivable from them then having a new twist. And it takes a long time to make the shift. It takes a lot of people to take the shift, to make the shift, and to have it consolidated. A lot of people didn't get on the bandwagon. There's a lot of research done, a lot of writing, a lot of attacking, a lot of shooting people down. And in many cases in history, bloodshed, burning at the stake, and God knows what all, before the new set of beliefs come in. Well, in the middle of the 19th century, these anomalies were discovered, and there began to be a shift. And I want you just to understand that. That's really our second objective today, is to understand the difference between a mechanistic and organismic view of the universe and man. Let me just say what it is right here, very quickly and briefly. Newtonian mechanics presupposed a static, completely ideal universe. But you see, the problem is that the Earth is not absolutely round. It would be ideal if it were exactly round, but it's not. And in fact, because of the gravitational pull of the moon, which is going around it, and because of the gravitational pull of the sun, around which it is going, causes the Earth to wiggle and change 10 to 12 inches 2 or 3 times a day. You know, the mountains are crunching and the oceans are breathing in and out and so on, and we're squeaking and creaking as we're going around all day long. That's what keeps us all kind of churned up, and which makes it possible for earthquakes to happen all the time. Really, it's not all that secure. There'd be people who thought up the phrase terra firma were off base. It's terra infirma. It's squeaking and heaving all day long because of these gravitational pulls. The universe and everything in it seems to be, every item in it seems to be unique. And nothing fits perfectly predetermined ideals. That's one thing that didn't fit into the Newtonian scheme. Secondly, it doesn't stand still. Not only is nothing ideal, or fits the ideals, but it's always changing. So we had to conceive of a universe that's in perpetual process. There was a view that in some parts of the universe, and it could still be true, that there's no such thing as time, that's unidirectional. I know that's hard for you to think because you've been brainwashed into seeing the hands of the clock go clockwise. But Whitehead says that the only reason time is irreversible is because of process. And that in fact, process does not take place in time, but time inheres in process. In other words, if nothing moved anywhere, there would be no time. And the fact that the acorn is planted and the oak tree comes up enables us to sense that there was a former time, a present time, and there will probably be something tomorrow. But if nothing happened anywhere, there would be no time. And the fact that you can't get that oak tree squished up and back into the acorn is the reason time is not reversible. If you could reverse process, time would be reversible. Now, there are some abstract senses in which time is reversible, but it just muddies the water for now, so later. Now, another mechanistic notion was that when anything happens, it happens to something by virtue of an external cause. Yet, that doesn't seem to square with lots of things. Sometimes things seem to happen by virtue of things inside of something. And Whitehead, who was one of those philosophers who helped pave the way for the shift from the paradigm shift from mechanistic thinking to what we are calling organismic thinking, was an affirmation that there is such a reality as subjective aim, which means that everything in the universe, even the atoms, have a certain say over their own destinies. Now, and Whitehead makes this other observation. If you take a strict mechanistic point of view and you say that everything a person does is predetermined by the sets of complex causes preceding whatever happens, it means that you, poor things, could not help coming to this lecture, and I, poor thing, cannot help saying exactly what I'm saying to you. And even though you think you could get up and walk out of here, you can't. Well, I shouldn't say that because that may embolden somebody to try. Or, if the very hesitation I'm making now is being caused and I can't help it. And Whitehead makes the observation, if you accept that, it undercuts the entire notion of morality. Nobody can be held accountable for anything. And that justice has no meaning. And all punishment is evil. And all reward is without foundation. Because when somebody's good, he can't help it. If your daughter jumps up and clears the table and washes the dishes and irons her clothes and sweeps up the kitchen, you shouldn't say thank you because poor thing, she can't help it. Don't ever tell her that, though, because that might be the end of the dishwashing. Well, this idea of subjective aim is very important, and Whitehead says that there is less of it in the lower levels. Remember yesterday we had this sequence of this hierarchy of ontological levels: mineral, vegetable, animal, man, so on. Well, the minerals down here don't have too much say over their destiny, but he says they have some. If you pour sulfuric acid on a rock, there will be a reaction. However, what molecule reacts in what way at what time has some say over it. But there will be a reaction. Still, the rock does not have enough say over its destiny to make it very interesting. That's why Whitehead says if you want a dull biography, ask a rock for his. One of the things that made Whitehead give up on using math as a means of understanding humanity was because it didn't take into account this basic notion. Now, I remember one of the big arguments among the people doing research on DNA, you know, which is a double-strand helix wound like this of chemicals. And one of the big arguments was, who winds these helices? They argued about it for 15 years. Do you know what they finally concluded? They wind themselves. Well, that was quite a penetrating insight, because you see, it leaps outside that mechanistic notion. Because you somehow says, yeah, I know they wind themselves, but who really winds them? Which shows, I mean, if you think that way, it means you haven't left the old mode of thinking, you see. This DNA winds itself, by golly. Nobody else winds it. Why shouldn't we be happy to allow it to wind itself? Now, this is one reason why volitional competence in the Anisa-Model is very important, because if you treat kids like material objects who ought to do exactly what you want them to do, when you want them to do it, for as long as you do them, you will be out of touch with the reality of that child, because he has a few ideas what he wants to do. The point is, you can relate to him in such a way that he might decide or condescend to do what you want him to do for a little while. But you better leave him a little leeway to make a few decisions on his own, or you will ruin him. One final point, and we'll have our coffee break. And as no one is out there doing it now, I was going to say maybe we would have it a little earlier than later. Huh? Is it possible? Because it breaks at a better time if we do it now. Or maybe I'll take a couple of questions. One other idea that distinguishes mechanistic from organismic, you can remember by understanding the word organismic itself. Organismic refers to a whole, where the emphasis is on integration of parts into a whole. The mechanistic version is the analysis of something into its parts. You can leave it there. But there's something else, namely that when the parts are related in a certain way, new properties emerge which belong only to the whole and cannot be found in any of the parts. And that's a very important new insight. And George sent me a little statement about alloys, which are a perfect exemplification of that idea. If you take, what's chrome? Is chrome an element or is it an alloy? It's an element. Well, let me just make up something to make my point. If you take, well, what's steel made of? Iron and tin, right? If you take iron by itself, it has a tensile strength of, say, 35. If you take tin, say it has a tensile strength